What's up guys, it's LBT from Combat Culture, and 3 years ago we released our first video, which was a glove review video in this very room. That remains our second most watched video to date. So what we wanted to do was to come out with a beginner's guide to boxing gloves. In this video, we'll break down everything from the anatomy of a glove to the padding and material to the sizes to the brands, essentially everything you'll need to know. So by the end of this video, hopefully you'll know exactly what you're looking for when you're shopping for your next pair of gloves. Let's go! So the first thing we're going to cover is the purpose of a glove. And on top of that list is going to be hand and wrist protection. Now, because of all the small bones we have in both our fingers and our hands, it's essential that we protect these while we're training so that when we compete, we're able to perform at 100%. Another thing that you need to protect too is your wrist, which is prone to injury, especially when you're throwing rounded punches like hooks and uppercuts. Another thing to consider too is that gloves aren't just about protecting the user, but also our training partners as well. A proper set of gloves can go a long way to reduce the amount of bruising, cuts, and other injuries that may happen to our partners while sparring. Another purpose of gloves is to help build endurance and power. Heavier gloves have increased resistance, which goes a long way to help develop your arm and shoulder endurance for more powerful punches. So the next thing we're going to go over is going to be the anatomy of a glove. And probably the first thing that you'll want to look into is going to be the knuckle padding itself. And what the knuckle padding does is that it absorbs impact, protects the knuckles, and reduces joint stress. And when it comes to the thickness of the padding, it varies depending on the brand and the type of glove. And the next thing is going to be wrist support. Like I mentioned earlier, our wrists are pretty prone to injury, so it's important that you get a pair of gloves that do have good wrist support so that can keep your wrists relatively stable. When it comes to wrist support, there's going to be two types of gloves primarily. One is going to be lace-ups, like this guy right here. The other is going to be Velcro, like this right here. So when it comes to lace-ups, the benefits of having a lace-up glove is that you're able to have a tighter fit, which is preferred by some folks when they're training just because there's less room for your hands to wiggle on, your gloves stay on much longer, and the feedback is just generally better. But some things to consider is that when you do use lace-ups, chances are you're gonna need someone to help you lace them up. They're a little bit more troublesome when it comes to taking on and off. And depending on the type of sport you do, when it comes to lace-ups, depending on how you lace it up, you may need to be extra careful if you're doing things like Muay Thai where there's grappling involved, just because of the abrasion. And another small thing to note about lace-up gloves too is because of the laces here, they are pretty susceptible to absorbing sweat, which I'm sure you know, over time, if you don't do anything about them, they really do start to smell. So you're gonna have to throw the laces, at least, not the whole glove, but the laces in the wash. So that's something to consider, that if you do have lace-up gloves and these are your primary set of gloves, that you air them out properly, make sure the laces get some sun, because once it starts to smell, you're gonna have to do some work to get that smell away. So the other type of wrist support is gonna be the Velcros. So in most situations when you're just getting started, these are probably the type of gloves that you're gonna get. They're easy to put on, easy to take off, easy to maintain as well. The drawbacks of a Velcro glove is that they don't fit on as tightly as lace-ups do. And also, depending on the material that they use for the Velcros, these can wear out over time, which means that they don't stick as well. And once they start wearing out and you aren't able to close them, they kind of flap around a little bit. It makes it really hard to continue using these gloves. At that point, the gloves is pretty much near end of life. So those are just some things to consider, if you're looking into Velcro gloves. But by and large, if you're just getting into this or you've only been doing this for so long, you probably want to look into Velcro gloves before you start looking at lace-up gloves. And the last thing we'll cover when it comes to the anatomy of the glove is going to be the interior of the glove. Most of the gloves that have come out in the last several years do have moisture wicking material in there, which means that they do a good job of not retaining the moisture. Because when it comes to training and the smells that come with the gloves after, the main culprit is moisture. When your gloves get wet, they retain the moisture just because of how a glove is built, right? It doesn't get a whole lot of sun or ventilation. Bacteria thrives on that stuff, and that's when all the smells start coming. But thankfully, a lot of glove makers now are using type of materials that are better at wicking away all that moisture, that helps prevent that buildup. So definitely take a look into the type of lining that you do have when you do purchase a glove. Even if you do have a type of glove that absorbs moisture really well, you just have to be extra diligent in terms of making sure you dry your gloves out, put some newspapers in there, glove dogs, air mount from a fan, whatever you got to do. Use a glove dryer, right? You'll just have to be extra diligent if you want to, ensure that your gloves are going to last you a long time before it starts smelling. Because like I said before in the previous video, once your gloves start to smell, it's tough to get that smell out. So try to do the work ahead of time so you don't have to deal with it later on. So the next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna go over the different types of gloves. And for the purpose of this video, we're gonna generalize it into 3 different categories, okay? We're gonna have boxing, Muay Thai, and kickboxing / MMA. So the first glove we're gonna go over is gonna be the boxing glove. Now, a couple of key features that are prominent in boxing gloves is that, generally speaking, boxing gloves are gonna have more padding focused on the knuckles because of the nature of the sport. You're throwing punches, okay? And generally speaking, they're gonna be a little more compact when it comes to their profile. And when it comes to the flexibility of the glove, they're not going to be as flexible as, say, a Muay Thai glove. A, because they want to ensure that there's protection on the wrist, right? And also B, because you're not really clinching or anything like that. Not a whole lot of need for this, or also opening these guys up. So, you know, if you are looking to shop for some gloves and you're going to be using it for cross training into Muay Thai or maybe kickboxing where there is some clinching involved, I'd be mindful with getting boxing gloves. Not to say that you can train with them, but there may be some, you know, features of a boxing glove that might not, you know, pivot as well into kickboxing or Muay Thai. The next type of glove we're going to get into is going to be the Muay Thai glove. So contrary to how a boxing glove is designed, a Muay Thai glove has pad distribution all over the glove, not just on the knuckle part, because there's also a lot of padding on the back just for blocking kicks and, you know, other types of defense that you might do. Another thing that you'll notice too is that oftentimes the glove in itself will have a stiffer wrist cuff, because again, there's a lot of blocking involved that you use with the glove when it comes to kicks and other things, okay? And as I mentioned earlier with the boxing glove, whereas those are a little stiffer, Muay Thai gloves generally gonna have a lot more flexibility for catching kicks and stuff, and also a lot more flexibility, you know, with the palm in itself. So when you do clinching and all the other things, okay? So those are some things to keep in mind when it comes to Muay Thai gloves. Now, one drawback about Muay Thai gloves when compared with most boxing gloves is that they do come in a bulkier form. Not all the time, but generally speaking, when you look at some of the bigger brands like Yakao, Fairtex, Twins, generally speaking, their main models are going to be a little bit bulkier than your average boxing glove. So that's something else to keep in mind. And the last type of glove we're going to cover is going to be the kickboxing glove. And honestly, this is kind of a loosey-goosey type. I feel as if this is a hybrid between boxing and Muay Thai. I think categorically, I don't know if this is an official type, but for me, I think there are a couple gloves I have in my collection that kind of fall right in the middle between a boxing and a Muay Thai glove. And, you know, in my opinion, you know, make them a really good choice if you're a kickboxer specific. And the reasons why I say that is because, you know, when you look at, in my opinion, kickboxer type gloves, is that they do have relatively good padding all throughout the glove, not just focused in the knuckle, but all throughout, kind of like a Muay Thai glove because of, you know, the defense and the blocking and stuff. But like a boxing glove, they aren't as flexible and they don't open as much as, you know, for example, Muay Thai glove does. You know, and another feature that I've noticed in some of these gloves that are primarily marketed to, you know, the kickboxing market is that a lot of them do have padding around where the palm is, you know, because oftentimes, you know, you block kicks like that in kickboxing. Okay, so again, you know, this is just kind of a loosey-goosey third type, but I figured I'd throw it in there, you know, just in case you find some gloves and you're like, oh, I don't know if this is a boxing or Muay Thai glove, maybe it's a kickboxing glove like some of these guys right here. All right, so the next thing we're going to cover are the category of gloves, and what I mean by that is that you've got your sparring gloves, you've got your bag gloves, and then you have your general all-purpose gloves. So the first one we'll go over are the sparring gloves. Now, sparring gloves in general are going to be a little bit heavier in weight, and that's, you know, primarily because they have more padding to protect, you know, the user and also the user's partner. Sparring gloves generally have softer padding inside, you know, so you want to think about gloves like the Ringside C17 or the Winnings is a really good example. They're generally just a little easier on your wrist, you know, and also more importantly, easier on your partner. And the next type of glove we're going to cover is going to be the bag glove. Now, opposite of the sparring glove, which generally is heavier with softer padding, the bag gloves are generally lighter, so like 8 to 12 ounces, and also they have denser padding. Now the denser padding, what it does is that it helps because there is a higher volume of punches, generally at a higher intensity, and because of that, the denser padding goes a long way to help with the longevity of the gloves, whereas the softer padding in the sparring gloves generally do wear down a lot faster. And once it wears down to a certain point, they're not going to be as soft and not going to be as pleasant to use when you're sparring. Whereas, you know, the bag gloves, you can kind of just keep wailing on them. You know, it's going to take a pretty long time for you to wear out that foam, and you know, when it finally does, it's probably time for an upgrade anyways. And the last category of glove is going to be your general all-purpose training glove, and these are marketed to be versatile, so you can use them both for bag, pad, and sparring. These are kind of an in-between of, you know, both the sparring and the bag glove. It's kind of the jack of all trades, master of none type of situation. These type of gloves are probably best for folks that just started training, or folks that just want one glove in their bag. You know, if you find yourself sparring pretty often, or, you know, specifically doing just a lot of bag work, maybe you want to look into one of the specialized gloves, you know. But if you're just training, you know, a couple times a week and you do a little bit of everything, this is probably the type of glove you want to look into. All right, so the next thing we're going to get into is the different type of materials that the gloves are made out of. So the first type we're going to go over is going to be genuine leather. Now, genuine leather is known for its durability, its breathability, and the ability to mold into your hands over time. Generally, this is going to be the material of choice when it comes to higher end gloves. And just like any other high-end leather product, you definitely want to make sure you take the extra steps to maintain your leather gloves, so that it'll last you a long time. And the next type of material is going to be synthetic leather. Now, when it comes to synthetic leather, generally it's going to be more affordable, and it's also more animal friendly, you know, for those of you that have that as top of mind. But some things to consider is that it's less breathable compared to genuine leather, and it probably won't last as long. However, it's a little bit more low maintenance compared to genuine leather, right? So those are some factors to consider, you know, if you're looking at one or the other. So the next material we're going to cover is going to be vinyl. Now, vinyl is an affordable alternative that you'll generally find in more budget-friendly gloves. The drawback is that they're generally less durable compared to genuine leather and synthetic leather gloves, but they do offer a smooth finish. So in terms of aesthetics, you know, there's a couple more options with that. If that's kind of, you know, the type of look you're going for, then, you know, vinyl may be a good choice for you. So the last material we're going to go over is going to be microfiber leather. Now, microfiber leather is a synthetic alternative to traditional leather, but it's just as durable and also water resistant. More and more glove makers are starting to experiment with microfiber leather, so, you know, you're going to see more and more of these in the market. You know, if you're looking for alternative to genuine leather, you know, but you don't really want to settle for synthetic leather, this could be something that you might want to look into. So now we're going to switch over to a different type of padding that you'll find in gloves. And the first type of padding we're going to go over is going to be the foam padding, which is probably going to be the most common type of padding. Now, when it comes to foam padded glove, typically they're going to have several different layers to help absorb the impact, and they usually last a pretty long time in terms of how long the gloves will feel, you know, the way that they do before they start wearing down and they start feeling different. So one thing to note about foam padded gloves is that several different companies, you know, use different type of foams, right, with different type of technologies. You know, you've got gloves like Winning that have the really soft foam that's really pillowy. Then you have other gloves such as Claytos, you know, that's a little stiffer and firmer, you know, and both of those gloves, you know, although they use foam padding, do provide different experiences and feedback, right? So that's something to look into as well, you know, the type of technology that they're using for their foam padding, right? But generally speaking, foam padding gloves are going to be the most common, more than likely the most affordable, and will probably last you the longest. So the next type of glove is going to be the horsehair padded gloves. Now, when it comes to the horsehair padded gloves, generally these are heavily associated with the higher end gloves and the gloves that are used in the professional competitive circuit. The reason why horsehair padded gloves are favored amongst many is because they are A, firmer, B, compact, and C, provide a much more solid punch compared to other materials. Now, one of the main drawbacks of horsehair padded gloves is that they do wear down over time. So once it does wear down, I mean, that's pretty much the end of life for that glove, unless you get it, you know, re-padded. So if you are considering horsehair padded gloves, you know, just remember that, you know, there is an expiration date, right? Once you use it up to a certain amount. So, you know, my recommendation is to reserve those for training sessions leading up to a fight, so you can get yourself accustomed with what horsehair padded gloves feel like. So the next type of padding that you may often find is gel padding. So gel padded gloves are usually combined with foam padded glove to create more comfort and more protection. So the drawback of gel padded gloves is that they are generally going to be heavier because of the material, all right? So they're typically going to be reserved only for training, not so much competing, you know? So, you know, if you want something that's going to protect your hands, or you're coming back from, you know, an injury, gel padded gloves may be a good alternative to look into, right? As you're working up your way, hitting pads or hitting the bag. And the final type of padding is very similar to gel padding, which is a combination, and that is, you know, combination of horsehair and foam. You know, many brands nowadays are experimenting with that, you know, having gloves that have the stability and the protection and durability of foam padded gloves, but also the compactness and also the impact of horsehair padded gloves, all right? Although not as common, they do exist, you know, so if you are thinking of leaning into one or the other and you want to try something right in the middle, that could potentially be something worth looking into. All right, so next we're going to move into the sizing and the weight of gloves. And generally when it comes to training gloves, sizes can range anywhere from 6 ounces all the way up to 24 ounces, all right? Depending on what the purpose of the gloves is. You know, generally when it comes to competing, you're going to be really looking at anywhere between 6 to 8 ounces. When it comes to general training, probably going to be like 12, 14 ounces. When it comes to sparring, it's probably going to be like 14, 16, maybe 18, depending on your weight class, okay? Now, like I mentioned earlier, there's a wide spectrum of weights that gloves do come in. You know, this, for example, is an 8-ounce glove, right? It's a little smaller. You know, I probably wouldn't use this for sparring, but, you know, they're probably good for bag work, pad work, right? If I want to be nice and limble, you know, or if I'm preparing for a competition, want to get used to the size of a glove, right? Because when it comes to defending, you know, the size of the glove does matter, you know? And on the flip side, you know, I've got a monster like this, which is 1.5 pounds, which I think is about 24 ounces, right? I probably won't be well in on the bag for all too long with this because, you know, my shoulders are going to wear down. But, you know, if I'm looking to build up some endurance, this could be, you know, a good pair of gloves to work with, right? So it really depends on the purpose of the glove. I'd say if you're just getting started, you know, you probably want to eyeball something between 12, 14, 16 ounces, right? If you have no intentions of sparring and you just want to do this for fitness purposes, I think you're good between, you know, 12 to 14 ounces. You may be tempted to do something smaller, but also keep in consideration that the smaller the glove is, the less padding there's going to be. And you've got to be, you know, extra diligent in terms of your form, right? Because there is an increased risk of you potentially, you know, hurting yourself if your form isn't on point with smaller gloves, whereas, you know, bigger gloves are a lot more forgiving. Okay, and on the flip side, if you are thinking about sparring, right, I probably wouldn't consider anything smaller than 14 ounces. Okay, if you do go under 14 ounces, I definitely check with your gym and your training partners to make sure that you guys are all good, you know, with the weight of the gloves. Okay, but that in general is the kind of sizing of gloves. And one final note about sizing of gloves too is that when it comes to the fit of a glove, obviously some are gonna be roomier, some are gonna be more snug, right? But the general rule I try to follow is that it should be snug, but still have enough room for hand wraps. Okay, if they are too tight with hand wraps on, that can cut off circulation over time, and it's also going to make it very uncomfortable, you know, for you to train in, right? Now, certain gloves do have a break-in period. You know, Clado races are notorious for that, right? But, you know, I think a general all-purpose glove shouldn't be so snug that it's going to be uncomfortable to wear, right? Especially with hand wraps on, and I do recommend wearing hand wraps for multitude of reasons. But on the flip side, you definitely don't want a pair of gloves that's too roomy, right? Because if a glove is too roomy and your hand is kind of just swimming around inside, you know, again, that's going to open up the opportunity and risk for potential injuries, right? Because if your hand's not snug and the glove's like that and you punch wrong, you know, you slide, mess up your wrists, mess up your knuckles, your fingers, right? All the things, okay? So when it comes to sizing, the general rule is that it should be firm, you know, snug, but still got enough room for you to put on some hand wraps and, you know, not feel like you're getting the life squeezed out of your hands, right? It should essentially fit like a glove. All right, the next topic we're gonna cover is probably gonna be the spiciest one, and that is gonna be the cost of a glove. You know, just like most things, there is a large range of, you know, gloves that you can purchase. And in terms of what the midpoint is, you know, that's going to differ from person to person, right? For a multitude of reasons. Okay. But generally speaking, premium gloves are going to be handcrafted. They're likely going to be made from, you know, higher quality materials like genuine leather, microfiber leather. They're probably going to last you a lot longer. And they're probably just more durable in general, and also more comfortable and probably more catered, right, to your hand. Okay. Now, when it comes to the other side, you know, of the fence, you know, the more budget friendly ones, right? Those are obviously going to be easier on your wallet. They're probably going to be made from, you know, lower quality materials, you know, synthetic materials that probably aren't going to last as long. And chances are you're probably going to have to replace them more often, right? But at the same time, you know, it's a smaller investment, you know, and it's probably a good idea if this is something you're just getting into and you're not really sure, or you just don't justify, you know, the cost of a glove. So when it comes to the different price points, you know, I think a good number to start at would be $50. This is if you're looking to train at least for a couple of months, you know, at $50 mark, you know, you can look into the Title training glove. I think that's like $50 or so. The Sanable training glove, which is right at the $50 mark. I think that's a really solid glove. I think Rev Gear's got some stuff around $50 or so. So, you know, there's a couple options there. I would probably stay away from some of the no-name mass-produced stuff that you see on Amazon, or, you know, the Everlast gloves that you see at, you know, your local sporting goods store. Now, if you're looking to invest a little bit more, around the $100 mark, that's when your options get pretty big, right? You know, at that point, you're looking at, you know, some of the different Fairtex gloves that's available. And Fairtex has several different models that you can look into. I think the most common one is the BGV1. That one, I think it's about $80 or so, and you can actually find it on Amazon. It's a very solid glove, even for boxers. You know, if you don't want a Muay Thai glove, you know, the BGV9 from Fairtex is also a really good glove. It's a Mexican style glove that's geared more towards boxers. Also, you know, at the $100 mark, you know, you can look into the Fighting line, which is part of the Title umbrella. You know, that's another solid glove as well. You know, there's several different options around that $100 mark. Now, once you get up to $150, $200, then your options just open up wide. You know, at that point, there's several different Mexican style gloves you could look into. I've been a big fan of the Taurus Medina gloves. I think that's under $200 if I'm not mistaken. That's a solid glove. The Top Boxer Win Ones and the Top Boxer Aliens are both fantastic gloves as well. I think those are like $150 or so. Several other gloves within that price point, you know, that'll probably last you a good couple of years, and you could probably just explore, you know, forever and ever within that price point. Anything over $200, you know, you're starting to look into the boutique premium brands. You know, at that point, you know, you can look into Rivals, you can look into the higher end Venoms, you can look into the 1v1s, you know, Grants, Winnings. I mean, there's several different gloves you can choose from, right? At that point, it's more of an investment. And for the most part, most of those brands that I name, you know, you do get a pretty good return on investment. I think when it comes to, you know, the price point of what makes the most sense, ultimately it's going to come down to you. I think regardless of how much you're looking to spend, there's good options, you know, to be had. What I'll say is that, you know, it doesn't matter how expensive the glove is, it doesn't make you a better boxer or a Muay Thai fighter, and it doesn't make you a worse Muay Thai fighter or boxer, right? At the end of the day, it's the person wearing the glove, not the glove that you're putting on. Okay, so the next thing we're going to cover is going to be the country of origin for the manufacturer. I know that for some shoppers out there, this is a determining factor. So I quickly want to just break down some of the different countries and, you know, kind of what to expect if you're buying gloves from those countries. So the first regions we're going to cover are going to be the American and European made gloves. Now, gloves made in these regions are going to be higher in quality, so most, if not all of them, are going to be premium level gloves. They're going to be using the highest quality in terms of material, so chances are they're going to be using some type of genuine leather. Most of the time they're going to give you an option in terms of which one to choose from. More than likely than not, they're probably run by one person or a very small team. Okay, so usually they're made to order. Not always, but usually they're made to order. When it comes to American manufacturers, there's really only so many at this point. I think there is John Galome, there is a Barracks, and I think 1v1. Right, I might be missing one or two, but it's not a long list. Same thing when it comes to Europe. You know, the main ones that come to mind is going to be Rocket over in France. There's Ellie in Paris as well. There's Donardo's out in Italy, and Lucky Khaki out there in Russia. Right, so again, I might be missing a couple, but all in all, it's not a really big list, okay? So just keep in mind that when you're purchasing gloves from these regions, you're A, definitely getting quality, but B, you're gonna be investing quite a bit, okay? So be prepared for that. So the next region is gonna be Mexican made gloves. Now, I recently made a video that's all about Mexican style gloves. You know, click the link somewhere around here. But you know, the TLDR is that Mexico has a really long and rich history with boxing, right? And with that comes the long and rich history of boxing gloves that are made traditionally in small mom and pop shops or very, very small factories, okay? Mexican gloves are generally made from genuine leather. They are more oftentimes than not made to last, right? So they're incredibly durable. But one thing to note about Mexican style gloves is that when it comes to the weight of the gloves, there's a little bit of inconsistency there. You could potentially be ordering a pair of 14-ounce gloves, but you get a pair of gloves that's, you know, like 13 and some change, or maybe like even 15 and some change, okay? Don't be shocked if that happens, right? That's a pretty common thing. You know, the QC with, you know, the Mexican style made gloves aren't quite the best, but you know, what you do get, you know, the end product itself usually is top notch. The next region we're going to cover is going to be Thailand. As you may guess, you know, most of the Muay Thai brands are manufactured in Thailand. So think Fairtex, Top King, Windy, just to name a few. Thailand made gloves are generally made from genuine leather, you know, although there are some substitutions that they're looking into nowadays. They're definitely made to last, and you know, you definitely get your bang for your buck, right? I would say, you know, most Thailand made gloves are in the ballpark of anywhere between $80 to around $150 or so. Right, so really good price point for some really well-made gloves that will probably last you quite some time. Okay, those are Thailand gloves. And the last region we're going to cover today is going to be Pakistan. Now, Pakistan is a major hub of glove manufacturing. I would say most of the gloves made today probably come out of Pakistan. Absolutely, for sure, the mass-produced ones. So when it, you know, because of that, you know, the quality does vary. So when you are purchasing a glove that comes from Pakistan, just make sure you do your homework, you know, look for some reviews just to ensure that, you know, what you're getting is going to be at the level that you're expecting. All right, so next thing I want to do is just kind of throw out some quick brands out there. You know, if you want to get more in depth, I've made several different videos that kind of dives into different brands available, but just off the top of my head, you know, a couple of brands is, you know, Everlast is a really big one. You know, chances are if you live in the States, you've probably seen some Everlast gloves at your big box sports store for about, you know, $30–40 or so. My recommendation is to generally stay away from those gloves because they aren't made to last. They are mass produced. If you are, you know, if you do need a pair of gloves in a pinch, those will probably do. But if you're looking to do this any more than a couple of months, you're probably going to want to look into something else. To their credit, Everlast does make some quality gear. Once you get up to like the $200 range, I think that's like the MX line, maybe $100 to $200. But you know, for anyone looking to get into this hobby, Everlast may not be the best place to look. Now, pivoting from that, another name that's pretty big in the States, in the world of boxing, is Title. Like I mentioned earlier, Title has the Title training glove for about $30–40 or so. I think that's an excellent entry-level glove. If you are looking to increase that budget a little bit, once you get up to like $100 or so, you're looking at the Fighting line and the Pro Max line, you know, both under the Title umbrella. Both are excellent gloves to look into. If you're more into Muay Thai, of course there's Fairtex. Fairtex has several different models, all under $150 or so. If you're looking at the BGV1, which is their flagship, that you can probably get for about $80 or so. You know, some other good Muay Thai brands would be Twins, Windy, Top King. You know, those are some brands off the top of my head, right, when it comes to the world of Muay Thai. Some other more budget-friendly brands would be Sanable, Rev Gear, Ringside, you know, all reputable brands with gloves, you know, from pretty budget-friendly price points. You know, there's also some MMA type brands, you know, we're talking about like Hayabusas and Venom. Those, you know, depending on the models can, you know, be a little bit more expensive, but for the most part, I've had good experiences with both of those brands. You know, if you're living out in Europe, you know, there's Booster, there's Joya, there's King Pro. All fantastic brands that I've used before in the past. You know, I think in terms of price points, about like 100 euros to 150 or so, right? Depending on the model, obviously it's going to range, but I think, you know, if you're looking to spend about that much, you can probably find something within that range. You know, if you really want to lean in and get like a Mexican style glove, you know, you can look into Torres Medina. That's one of my favorites right now. I think Campeones are really good. Of course, there's Cleto Reyes, which is probably the easiest one to get out of the bunch. It's about like 150 or so, give or take. But there's several different brands, you know, when it comes to Mexican style gloves, right? Nakali, Gills, you know, all of which you can find online, but you know, those are going to cost you about like $150, close to $200 or so. So just keep that in mind. And then finally, there's, you know, the really premium brands, right? You know, we're talking our Grants, our Winnings, and you know, I'm not even gonna mention Donardo's, which is like in a league of its own, right? But you know, Grants and Winnings, Bayonettas, right? Those are talking, you know, those are probably in the territories of $300, $400, $500, right? Depending on the model and depending on availability. At that point, you know, you're probably someone who's really invested into the sport. You know, I think, you know, with the cost of those gloves, you definitely do get a return on investment, right? I don't think it's something that you're spending on just for the brand. I mean, the quality is definitely there. But again, you know, if you're talking about, you know, putting that type of investment, you know, you got to make sure that this is something you're really serious about and something you really want to do. Okay. And also another really good brand that I forgot to mention was Rival as well. But all in all, there's several different brands to choose from, right? There's so many different factors that make certain brands better for some people, you know, so just make sure you do your research, check out some of the reviews available on YouTube, and hopefully you'll find the right match for you. And the last thing to consider is your training style. You know, if you are looking to primarily just, you know, hit the bag or work on the pads with, you know, no goals of sparring, maybe all you need is a pair of bag gloves. Or maybe if all you want to do is spar, all you need is just a pair of, you know, sparring gloves, right? I am an anomaly. There's no need to have any more than like 2-3 pair of gloves, right? I'm a bad example. I just have a terrible shopping habit, right? But, you know, again, for the most of you guys, I think, you know, if you know what your goals are, just go towards that. And if you decide that, hey, maybe I want to try something different, then you can kind of start building up your collection, right? All right, guys, hopefully you enjoyed today's video, learned something new, and hopefully gained a couple of tips that can help you make that decision in terms of what your next pair of gloves or your first pair of gloves is gonna be. If you enjoyed today's video, hit the like and subscribe button. It goes a long way to help us out. Keep training, stay safe, and be healthy. We will see you guys in the next one. Boom.